Most celebrity beefs simmer for years before anyone notices. This one started with a joke in 2016 that nobody thought twice about until a slap 6 years later made everyone go back and say, wait, that's where it began. Today, I'm breaking down every major moment in the Will Smith and Chris Rock feud, from the diss that kicked it off to the revenge special that turned it into Netflix history, starting with the joke that started everything. 2016 Oscars monologue diss. The 88th Academy Awards in February 2016 had a problem. For the second year in a row, every single acting nominee was white, which sparked the viral hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. Jada Pinkett Smith and Spike Lee publicly announced they were boycotting the show. Jada's boycott wasn't just about systemic racism. Will Smith had just been snubbed for his performance in Concussion, which gave critics an opening to ask whether this was really about Hollywood's diversity problem or just about one couple being mad. Chris Rock was hosting that night, and he went straight for both of them. He compared Jada's boycott announcement to him declaring he was boycotting Rihanna's panties. The punchline was simple: you can't boycott something you were never invited to in the first place. It was a direct shot at Jada for acting like her absence mattered when she wasn't nominated for anything. Then Rock brought up Wild Wild West, pointing out that Will had made a massive paycheck from one of the worst movies ever made. The implication was clear. This wasn't about fighting for black actors. This was about Jada being upset that her husband got snubbed. At the time, most people loved it. Mainstream critics praised Rock for addressing the controversy without killing the vibe of the show, but segments of black media felt different. Some argued that he had needlessly humiliated a black woman on live television during a ceremony already under fire for excluding black artists. Either way, in 2016, it didn't look like the start of a feud. It looked like standard awards show ribbing that would be forgotten by next week. Then the slap happened in 2022, and suddenly everyone went back to rewatch the 2016 monologue with new eyes. Fans and outlets started calling it the first shot, even though 6 years had passed with no public beef between them. Rock himself later confirmed in his Netflix special Selective Outrage that the feud started in his mind when Jada suggested before the 2016 show that he should quit his hosting gig because the Academy had snubbed Will. That's when it became personal for him. So what looked like a throwaway joke at the time became the origin story of one of the messiest celebrity feuds of the decade. Nobody clocked it as the beginning of anything until a slap made everyone realize it had been simmering the whole time. But if you think a monologue diss was bad, wait until you see what happened when they ended up on the same stage 6 years later. 22. Academy Awards slap incident, March 27, 2022, was supposed to be Will Smith's coronation. He walked into the 94th Oscars as the clear frontrunner for Best Actor, third nomination, decades-long prestige push, finally about to pay off. King Richard was the culmination of everything. This was his night. Chris Rock appeared as a presenter for Best Documentary Feature and made a throwaway G.I. Jane 2 joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head. Except Jada had publicly discussed her alopecia areata, an autoimmune condition that causes hair loss, which made the joke significantly more loaded than Rock probably intended. Or maybe exactly as loaded as he intended, depending on who you ask. Here's where it gets weird. Broadcast footage shows Smith initially laughing at the joke. Then the camera cuts to Jada, who is visibly not amused, and when it cuts back to Smith, something has changed. Seconds later, he stands up, walks onto the stage in front of millions of people, and slaps Chris Rock across the face with an open hand. Rock, visibly stunned, says Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me but immediately keeps the show running. The man took a slap on live TV and didn't miss a beat. That's genuinely impressive whether you think he deserved it or not. Smith returns to his seat and shouts, "Keep my wife's name out of your fucking mouth," twice. The American broadcast muted the audio, but international feeds captured everything, and those clips went globally viral within minutes. Every other moment of the ceremony, including Smith's own Best Actor win less than an hour later, was completely overshadowed. The biggest night of his career, and this is what everyone remembers. Rock declined to file a police report. No criminal charges were pursued. Some people saw that as generous. Others saw it as an example of celebrity insulating someone from consequences that ordinary people would face for the exact same behavior. Walk up to someone at your job, slap them in front of everyone, and see if I choose not to press charges gets you out of trouble. In his acceptance speech, Smith drew a parallel between himself and Richard Williams as a fierce defender of his family without naming Rock. He apologized to the Academy and his fellow nominees, but not to the guy he just hit. The next day, he issued a written apology calling his behavior unacceptable and inexcusable, which is what you do when your publicist reminds you that your entire career is about to implode. So, to recap, a man wins the Oscar of his career on the same night he commits an act of live television violence. The victim keeps the show running like nothing happened, and the question of whether the joke was out of line or the slap was justified remains genuinely contested to this day. Some think Rock crossed a line mocking a medical condition. Others think Smith proved he can't handle basic comedian banter. Both things can be true, but if you think one slap derailed a career, wait until you hear about the 10-year ban the Academy handed down 2 weeks later. 122. 10-year Academy ban decision. The Academy moved faster than anyone expected. On March March 30th, 3 days after the slap, the Board of Governors opened formal disciplinary proceeding under the standards of conduct they'd updated after Me Too, threatening suspension, expulsion, or other remedies. Before they could finish, Smith resigned his membership April 1st, calling his act shocking, painful, and inexcusable, which, they were. Most people read this as damage control, an attempt to take responsibility while maybe heading off full expulsion. It didn't work. On April 8th, Academy President David Rubin and CEO Don Hudson announced a 10-year ban from all Academy events and programs, in person or virtual, including the Oscars ceremony itself, effective immediately through at least April 2032. Smith kept his Oscar and remained eligible for future nominations. He just couldn't attend the ceremony. If he wins Best Actor again in 2029, he'll have to watch someone else accept it for him, which is darkly comedic when you think about it. The man could theoretically sweep awards season, land his second Oscar, and be legally barred from showing up to claim it. The ban was unprecedented in length for a high-profile star. Reactions split hard. Critics argued the punishment was disproportionate compared to the Academy's historically slow response to members accused of sexual assault or harassment, some of whom kept their awards and memberships for years. Roman Polanski still has his Best Director Oscar from 1977. Harvey Weinstein kept his membership until 2017, decades after allegations first surfaced. They framed it as performative moral authority from an institution suddenly desperate to look decisive after decades of inaction. Far worse. Supporters said a 10-year ban was appropriate or even lenient, given that Smith committed physical violence on live television in front of millions. The man walked on stage, slapped a presenter, shouted profanity twice from his seat, then stayed for the rest of the show and accepted an Oscar 40 minutes later. At a certain point, consequences have to mean something. Race complicated the discourse further. Some noted the irony of an institution long criticized for excluding black artists, now vigorously punishing one of its most prominent black winners. The image of two black men in conflict seized upon to reinforce stereotypes, while the Academy played moral arbiter. Others argued that applying a different standard based on race would itself be a form of bias, and that the appropriate focus should be on the conduct, not the identity of the individual. Both sides had a real point, which is exactly why the debate never resolved cleanly. Trade publications reported that several of Smith's film projects were quietly shelved or delayed in the aftermath. Netflix put Fast and Loose on hold. Sony pushed back Bad Boys 4. Commentators began asking whether his box office viability had been permanently damaged or only temporarily diminished. As it turned out, that question would be tested almost immediately with the release of a very expensive historical drama he'd been working on before the slap even happened. Toy 22, Emancipation movie flop and fallout. Will Smith's career redemption project was supposed to be Emancipation, a historical drama about survival and freedom. Instead, the slap turned it into a referendum on his character before anyone saw a single frame. Here's what happened. Emancipation is a 2022 Apple Original Films historical action thriller directed by Antoine Fuqua, with Smith playing Peter, an enslaved man who escapes a Louisiana plantation and navigates swamps and Confederate forces to reach the Union Army. The film is inspired by the real 1863 Whipped Peter abolitionist photographs. The budget was reported at around $120 million, making it one of the most expensive original features a streaming service had mounted at the time. A massive financial bet that the slap had now complicated enormously. Principal photography had begun before the slap, leaving Apple with a near-completed prestige film starring an actor who had just become the center of a global controversy. The company had to make a release decision that would inevitably be read as either a vote of confidence or an attempt to quietly bury the project. Apple opted for a limited theatrical release on December 2nd, 2022, followed by an Apple TV Plus streaming debut on December 9th, a hybrid strategy designed to qualify for awards while minimizing theatrical exposure. Trade reports describe theatrical grosses as modest and insufficient to justify the budget, even accounting for streaming value, which is a polite way of saying it flopped. Critical reception was mixed. Reviewers praised Smith's intense performance, but questioned whether the film offered new insights into slavery or risked turning historical trauma into a formulaic survival thriller. The desaturated, stylized visual approach also divided critics. Some found it striking, others found it distancing, making the brutality of slavery feel aesthetically processed rather than fully immersive. The film received comparatively little major awards recognition, no dominant presence in Best Picture or Best Actor races, confirming that the combination of mixed reviews and the lingering slap controversy had blunted its awards prospects, regardless of whether a formal boycott existed. Smith openly worried in interviews that director Antoine Fuqua and the crew were being penalized for his terrible judgment at the Oscars, framing the situation as a potential unjust collaborators whose work was entangled with his personal misconduct. And this is where it gets genuinely complicated. The episode sparked broader debate about separating art from artist. Some argued audiences have the right to make moral choices about which stars they support. Others said avoiding the film created collateral damage to Fuqua, co-stars Ben Foster and Charmaine Bingwa, and hundreds of below-the-line workers who had nothing to do with the slap but were now tied to a project everyone wanted wanted to avoid discussing. The irony is brutal. A film about a man enduring injustice and fighting for freedom got caught in the crossfire of a PR disaster and became a symbol of its star's fall from grace. The $120 million budget makes the flop label feel concrete and real. This was supposed to rehabilitate Smith's image as a serious actor capable of carrying prestige historical dramas. Instead, it became Exhibit A in the case that his brand was now toxic, at least temporarily. But if you think a flopped movie and a career in limbo was the final word on this feud, you haven't seen Chris Rock's Netflix special yet. 23. Selective outrage comedy special response. Almost exactly 1 year after the slap, Chris Rock finally got to speak, and he did it in the most public, monetized, and strategically crafted way possible. A live Netflix special that also happened to be a historic first for the platform. On March 4th, 2023, Rock premiered Selective Outrage at the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore, marking Netflix's first ever global live programming event. The company bet on Rock's name and audience curiosity about the slap to showcase its live streaming capabilities, essentially using one of entertainment's most controversial moments as the proving ground for their technical infrastructure. The special quickly entered Netflix's weekly US top 10 most watched list, and beyond viewership, it delivered what streamers crave most: a cultural moment. Clips, quotes, and reactions spread across social media and news outlets far beyond the runtime itself, turning the special into a week-long conversation rather than a one-night show. Netflix executives couldn't have scripted better promotional material if they'd tried. In the final, roughly 10 minutes, Rock addressed the slap directly. He recounted his long-standing admiration for Smith, establishing himself as a former fan before delivering the real argument. Then he argued the real tension began when Jada publicly suggested he should quit his 2016 Oscars hosting job because Will hadn't been nominated for Concussion. Rock framed the slap as misdirected anger. In his telling, Smith's real humiliation came from Jada's public disclosure of her entanglement with singer August Alsina, discussed openly on Red Table Talk. Rock argued that everybody had called Smith derogatory names over that revelation, but Rock hadn't joined in, making him a safe, low-risk target to rage. He boasted he took that hit like Pacquiao and emphasized he chose not to retaliate, partly because he was raised not to fight in front of white people. That line earned a huge audience reaction, folded the incident into Rock's broader commentary on race, respectability, and black behavior in predominantly white space like the Oscar, transformed a celebrity feud into cultural criticism, which is exactly what Rock does best. During the live broadcast, Rock made a verbal slip, claiming Jada had told him not to host because Will wasn't nominated for Emancipation when the film was actually Concussion. He self-corrected on air. Netflix later edited the mistake out of the on-demand version, prompting debate about whether scrubbing a live performance undermines its authenticity, especially when the error most watched segment of the whole. The edit raised questions about what live permanent version gets polished after. Critical reception broadly positive. Some praised Rock. Others felt his heavy focus on Jada's personal life veered into punching down at a black woman. Fellow comedians and talk shows like The View largely defended Rock's right to process the slap through stand-up. Some cultural critics worried it would prolong the feud rather than allow healing. But here's where it gets complicated. Prolonging the feud was arguably the entire point from a business perspective. Reports indicated Smith found the special embarrassing and hurtful, but was determined to avoid a public back and forth. Here's the thing. Rock, as a stand-up comedian, could turn the feud into a ticketed event. Smith, as an actor, had no equivalent organic venue to respond without looking defensive. Smith apologized through press releases and YouTube videos. Rock responded with a sold-out comedy event that trended globally. The asymmetry is complete. Selective outrage functioned as Rock's closing argument in the court of public opinion, cementing the slap as a long-term pop culture reference point and ensuring that phrases like selective outrage and the Pacquiao line became part of the cultural lexicon. It didn't close the feud, it archived it, ensuring it lives forever as pop culture canon, making it nearly impossible for either party or the Academy to simply move on. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.